Hello and welcome to Security Analysis, a weekly program on security issues, which is part of the Bharata First platform. I am Uday Bhaskar. This program, as the name suggests, will review contemporary security matters in an informed and objective manner. The aim being to shed light. उद्देश्य यही है कि जहां तक हो सके रोशनी डालें और धूल नहीं. As the saying goes, that we want to bring light and not heat and dust. The central theme is to add to our understanding of developments, recent developments to the extent possible in the security and strategic domain, and improve our understanding of what may have happened. And to the extent possible, in a modest manner, we also are trying to make some policy relevant suggestions about the way ahead, which hopefully could be reviewed constructively by the powers that be. This week, the focus is on the recent tragedy of Mumbai, when Cyclone Taukte, that is the name of the cyclone, Cyclone Taukte, struck the west coast of India, and many precious lives were lost, particularly on accommodation barge Papa 305. That is the way it is referred to. The tragedy of P305 and the other support vessels that are part of the offshore drilling activities in and around Bombay High is an exigency that could perhaps have been avoided, or at the very least, the cost in human lives could have been reduced. This is what most experts have said. 66 people lost their lives on Papa 305, P305 alone. Additional deaths have been reported from other support vessels, and the overall figure is estimated to be closer to 90. Our condolences to the families of those who have lost their loved ones. In summary, the death and destruction caused by the cyclone has been described as India's worst offshore tragedy. To better understand what may have led to this tragedy at sea and what kind of policy correctives could be considered in the months ahead, we have a panel of experts to illuminate the subject. Allow me to introduce, first of all, Captain Sudhir Kumar. Captain Sudhir is a veteran. He has 30 years experience as a master and has also carried out a number of operations outside of India, particularly in the area of evacuation. Welcome, Captain Sudhir Kumar. We also have with us Captain Naveen Singhal, who is also an internationally renowned expert in the maritime domain. He's a consultant based out of Singapore, a member of various international bodies, and is also a regulator, an inspector for quality, safety, health, and environmental considerations, or the kind of benchmarks that the Merchant Navy expects. And we're also joined by Commander Anand Kulkarni, who retired from the Indian Navy. He commanded 2 ships in the Navy. Subsequently, he's been a master and has a lot of familiarity with the west coast of India, where he has been working both in the offshore and related support areas. Let me turn to you first, Commander Kulkarni. Anand, if I could request you to perhaps explain to our viewers what could have been the kind of chronology that led to the sinking of Papa 305? Or better still, why don't you try and tell our viewers what is an accommodation barge and take it from there? Anand?
Yes, sir. I will first tell what an accommodation barge is. An accommodation barge in the Bombay High is not just a floatel. It is not just an accommodation. It has also got a deck space to keep fabrication material, engineering items which are required by the oil platform. To describe it briefly, imagine a floating steel box of 100 to 150 meters in length, 30 to 50 meters in breadth, 10 to 15 meters in height. And in this floating steel box, you will have freshwater tanks, fuel tanks, ballast tanks. And on the top one end of the deck space, 30 to 40%, will be a 3-4 storied accommodation, offices, messes, galleys. And the topmost compartment will be the control room. On top of the control room, you'll have the helipad. Now, the remaining 70% of the deck space is the storing space for the fabrication material. There will also be a couple of cranes to transport material from the barge to the platform. On the forward part, there will be a towing bridle to be towed by a tug. The barge will be secured in its place by 8 anchors, 4 forward and 4 aft. The barge is brought to the location by a towing tug, and the anchors are deployed by the anchor handling tugs. Now, what happens in case a weather warning is received? The master of the barge, he will tell the charters that, listen, we have received such and such a warning, and I require X number of hours to pick up all my 8 anchors and move to a safe location. So give me permission. So I'm sure the master of the barge, Papa 305, would have done that. But finally, the call is taken by the ONGC and the AFCONs, who are the AFCONs being the ones who have brought the barge, and ONGC who have hired AFCONs to do the job. So the other vessels in the field, when the weather warning was given, did move to safer locations as per the laid down SOPs in the Maritime Operations Manual issued by the ONGC. But Papa 305 moved only 200 meters away, which is not okay, because this 200 meters movement is done in normal conditions when weather gets a little rough, say for 2-3 days. They should have evacuated all the personnel and moved to a safer location. But I think maybe the charters, that is ONGC and the AFCONs, perhaps they might have underestimated the strength of the cyclone, or they thought they were far away from the path, or some other considerations, and they decided to remain there, and they got the full fury of the cyclone, which resulted in whatever happened thereafter.
Anand, I'll come back to you in a little while about the search and rescue, but I think this is an important point you're making, that at which point the agencies involved should have taken the necessary safety precaution in terms of moving the barge from its location. The media reports that I have seen seem to suggest, and I'm emphasizing the word seem to suggest, that the onus is being laid at the door of the master of the barge. But an investigation would perhaps give us more kind of light on this issue. But let me turn to you, Captain Singhal. You have had enormous experience in this area, and you're currently in Singapore. If one were to look at institutional responsibilities, the master of the vessel or the barge is only one of the many links. और जो हम बार बार कहते हैं कि जब इस प्रकार का हादसा हुआ है, जो सांस्थानिक जिम्मेदारी है, वो किस प्रकार का होना चाहिए? Who should be in this particular food chain, as it were, in terms of, let's call it the responsibility chain? If you could perhaps share your thoughts on that, Captain Singhal.
Right. Thank you very much at the outset for the invitation to join this panel of experts to discuss the incident. For those who are new to the oil and gas and the offshore operations, just for their information, the North Sea operations, which is the one which started first around the 1850s, and around the same time, they started operations on the west coast of USA in the Santa Barbara area, Santa Barbara Channel, which is near Los Angeles, and then in the Gulf of Mexico in the 1930s. ONGC started operations sometime in the mid 1950s, around 1956, for operations within India. Now, the three key institutions, in my opinion, is first is the Office of the DG of Shipping. That's the first pillar. The second important is the ONGC itself, the main charterer. And the last, in my opinion, the third, also very important, are the EPC contractors and the subcontractors which ONGC engages. So if we go first to the first pillar, and that is the DG itself, it's a national body, and they issue licenses for certifying ships' seaworthiness. Now, that is the job that they are supposed to do under the Merchant Shipping Act. Now, in the Merchant Shipping Act, there is a section 456 which empowers them to extend this authority beyond the territorial waters of 12 nautical miles to up to 200 nautical miles. And the Mumbai High region is very much within that range. And it also applies, the Merchant Shipping Act and these regulations also apply to foreign flag vessel. Here in this case, Papa 305 is a St. Kitts registered vessel. So it applies to them as well as GAL constructor. Now, the responsibility of carrying out the inspections and issuing the certificates, the DG has passed it on to organizations which they have recognized to carry it out on their behalf. And these are called as recognized organizations. Since the DG has a lean team, they have engaged the recognized organizations to carry out this task. Now, there are two important circulars which the DG has issued, circular number 2 and 8 in 2014, and how effectively these organizations recognized by the DG to sort of carry out these inspections, how effectively they've been implemented is something which only time will show. However, we cannot absolve, the DG's office cannot be absolved because they have their own responsibility of carrying out physical verification of the vessels. And more important is they have to carry out audits of these organizations which they have recognized. I'm sure the audits are being conducted, and possibly the inspection and verification of ships also is taking place. But we need to also examine how effective this is. In fact, the DG has the authority to impose additional requirements on vessels operating there in the offshore based on the nature and criticality and the complexity of the operations. Now, if I have to give you a simile in a different manner, and this can apply to any city in the world, it can apply to Tokyo, it can apply to New Delhi, it can apply to Singapore, New York, anywhere. If for a moment we take the cops off from the road, we switch all the traffic lights off, there's going to be chaos on the roads. We're going to have accidents, and we're going to have traffic jams. So while it is too early to say whether the cop has done his job or not, and that will only depend on an independent investigation as and when that is conducted in future. So that's the role on the part of the first pillar, that's the Director General of Shipping Office.
Thank you, Captain Singhal. That's very comprehensive. And I just want to add that when we talk about safety at sea, and Anand, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this later, is that the DG Coast Guard also has a locus. That, if I remember right, the DG Coast Guard is the chairman of the Coordination Committee for Safety at Sea, but we'll come to that later. But I'll turn to you, Captain Sudhir Kumar. You have had many years in the Merchant Navy, and when I was looking at your CV, there was reference to the fact that you were the OIM, the officer who was looking after evacuation in 2 recent cases in Thailand. So can I request you to share your thoughts about the international practice and protocol whenever there is an emergency which calls for evacuation of personnel who might be on a support vessel or on the drill or whatever the case may be? Over to you, Captain Sudhir.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me for this noble cause. I've been in the field offshore from 2004, and what I see here is the maritime regulation does not comply and does not cover everything in offshore. The rigs are not following completely 100% maritime regulation. They have their own requirements. Their working hours are different. Their skill requirements are different. So it's slightly different from the normal shipping. But the barge, of course, is complying with all the shipping requirement, maritime requirement. So there are 2 different things. When they sign a contract for offshore company, they have the obligation to follow the field requirement. In fact, they sign a contract if there is a difference between the procedure between the vessel, barge, or the company which is managing the offshore field, they have a bridging document where they agree that in case of emergency or if there is a difference in process, they will follow the ONGC requirement and whatever they agree between them, So for emergency, this is one of the first thing they normally look at it. Every field will have an emergency plan, which will cover also emergency evacuation. Now, emergency evacuation cannot be decided by the master overnight. It is there is a shore-based central emergency response team, which will declare the emergency, which will say, okay, they'll start preparing 7 days or 10 days in advance when they see the storm coming. They will have one by one, depending on 5 days before, 7 days before, 4 days before, that now you have to prepare. Now there is a list which is maintained because you're talking about big number, 300 or I think they had over 600 or 800 people in the field or total. I think 261 persons on Papa 305.
Yeah.
And ONGC should have the complete picture how many persons are there in offshore. And they know they have been in the field for 40, 50 years, odd years in that. They know exactly what are the resources available, how much time will it take to evacuate people, and they should have started preparing. They must have done it also, I'm quite sure, but what has happened, I don't know in the last minute. But if you ask the barge master to move just 12 hours or 24 hours before the storm hits you, it is too less time for him to move out. Okay, he can't do much because in that weather condition, as he said, you need 8 tugboats to move the barge out. Yeah, she should have been out at least 3-4 miles off, but I'm not sure why she just moved 200 meters, nothing,
Yeah.
It's very small. Now, in this scenario, what happens is when you see the storm coming and your field is coming into that center of the storm, you start managing your persons on board. You start reducing the manpower because if you have 300 people on board accommodation barge, you need 10 chopper sorties or 30 chopper sorties, to get the people out. It will take about 2 days to get.
Sudhir, on this, can I just interrupt you very briefly? You're talking about chopper sorties for evacuation.
Yeah.
आपसे मेरा एक सवाल है साहब, जहां तक अंतरराष्ट्रीय जो इस वक्त मान लीजिए प्रोसीजर्स हैं, डू दे यूज हेलीकॉप्टर्स फॉर इवैक्यूएशन? वो पहला सवाल है। और दूसरा, जहां तक ओएनजीसी है और बॉम्बे हाई की जो हम बात कर रहे हैं, वहां पे आपके जानकारी में कुछ इस प्रकार के प्रोविजंस हैं दैट इन द केस ऑफ एन इमरजेंसी, मान लो whether it's day or night, that they have the capacity for evacuation by helicopter? If you have any thoughts on this.
See, evacuation landing, I don't know whether Papa 305 had the night landing facility or not, because there's a lot of extra requirement for helicopter landing in that area. She can't land without proper aviation authority permission. There's certain basic requirements are there for helideck requirements. So what happens in India, I don't know, but offshore, what happens, the company which is operating the field knows what are the resources available to them. You will have to use all the resources, maybe supply boat, your ferries, helicopter, whatever is available. Start reducing the manpower so that in last 48 hours, you have only limited number of people remaining on board, which you can remove with just 2 chopper operation or 1 chopper operation. In last 24 hours is too less time for any, because helicopter can operate only if the wind force is less than 40 knots. I think that is they have a limitation.
Requirement.
If anything, the wind goes beyond 40, she can't operate. So you'll have to wait for the weather to calm down and then you will have a chopper operation. So all these things are planned, drill is carried out, and these are, you have to, when you carry out the drill, then you know where you are, what is missing, and then you upgrade your facility. And this is how we have done it, we have done the drill before the storm coming in. And this is a typhoon, cyclone season. I'm sure they must be worried about cyclone. They wanted to get finish the job in that area.
And I suppose there's also a commercial consideration that you want to try and finish whatever be the assigned task and timelines. But I'll come back to you, Captain Sudhir. Anand, I want to request you to look at 2 issues. One, the point made by Sudhir about the use of helicopters in evacuation. So to the best of your knowledge, I'm not sure if you are, had any direct experience on this. We know for sure that the Indian Navy, when it was called in to do the rescue for Papa 305 and the other boats, they did a heroic job in the way in which the rescue and evacuation was done. So the chopper has a very critical role for sure. But from your experience on the West Coast or wherever you had your maximum time as a master and the condition of the barges. So the first question, do our support barges have facilities for chopper operations? And secondly, what is the condition of these barges? When you have sailed on a few of them, and how does the compliance in terms of the various safety standards? Anand?
Yes, sir. So the barge does have a helideck. In fact, all the accommodation barges in the Bombay High have a helideck, and generally the helicopter flying is restricted to daytime.
Okay.
Because night facility is not there in many places. Secondly, what Captain Sudhir Kumar said is absolutely right, that you have to use all possible resources which you have got to reduce the number of personnel. So there are supply vessels which are servicing the barge. Those supply vessels, they can carry passengers too. So at one go, they can carry at least 12 passengers, because 12 is the limit for a non-SPS vessel. So each supply vessel doing a 12% trip and a supply vessel which can carry more personnel, you can quickly reduce the number of people, and helicopter can augment if at all. So helicopters are available in the with the ONGC, and they definitely can be used. But all resources must be used.
So the second question for you is about the current state of barges. When we look at support vessels in India and
Yes,
the
sir.
compliance, can you just tell us something on that?
Yes, sir. The thing is that now take the case of Papa 305. It was registered in St. Kitts, which as per the media reports go, is a blacklisted country. So the barges must be registered in non-blacklisted countries, first of all. Secondly, if possible, they should be of IRS classification. And then of late, means the past 2 years, we have had a few cyclones in the Bombay Eye. So our barges are single-hulled barges. So they can be probably double-hulled barges. In the case of Papa 305, one more point is that she was, I think, 2004 built, so 17 years old. Maybe some condition can be put that the barge should not be more than 10 or 15 years old. But I have operated with the barge Papa 305, and her condition was generally satisfactory. But there is a ONGC checklist. This ONGC inspects the vessels prior to hiring her. So if that has been done properly, the barge should have been in okay condition.
Thank you. Captain Singhal, can I just take this forward with you? You are now, based in Singapore, and you are a regulator, inspector, and so on. When we look at the Indian standard, in terms of compliance, I want to share an anecdotal kind of observation that I've heard over the years. Now we have Europe. It's a large kind of, shall we say, entity as a continent. It has many countries. Now, whenever I've spoken to those who have served in the merchant marine, they talk about varying degrees of compliance. That if you're a master, I don't want to name individual countries, but when you enter, say, country A, there is a certain, understanding about how strict they are. Perhaps if you go to country C, it may not be as strict. I've heard this very often. The same thing has been said about ASEAN. You're in Singapore. Singapore has a certain level of compliance. Perhaps not all other 9 ASEAN countries come up to the same level. This is my conjecture. So when you look at India, and India's shipping is fairly, shall we say, large. India is a big player in the regional context in the maritime domain. What is your sense of the compliance track record?
Right, sir.
Safety of sea.
Right. So interesting question. So we need to segregate this into two sort of compliance. One is the compliance which is implemented under the IMO regulations, which is, across all the nations, right? All the maritime countries. And the other is the compliance which is implemented, by those who are working with the oil majors. So fortunately or unfortunately, the compliance which is enforced by the oil majors under an association which is called as the OCIMF, which is based in London Oil Companies International Forum, they have come out with regulations which go beyond the requirements of the International Maritime Organization. So while you are right in saying that in certain countries, which could be in ASEAN countries, or it could be even in countries in Africa, the local inspections which are carried out by the port state may not be as good as something that has been carried out in some other part of the world. But when it comes to oil companies and they are chartering, whether they are chartering a barge, a tug, a tanker, or a rig, or whatever, they have defined certain standards. Now, and these standards, they go beyond the IMO. So when they are implemented, there is quite a good guarantee that the vessel that has been hired by the oil company on a charter is, and these requirements reflect on two important aspects. One is the hardware, that is the vessel itself, like Anand was mentioning about the condition of the vessels. So that's one. The second more important part is they also conduct very stringent audits of the office to assess whether the management ashore has the competency, has the right procedures, and has everything in place to manage the ships, because they see the shore-based management as a grandfather and the ship as a father. So if the grandfather is not in a good condition, they are not going to hire that vessel on a time charter. So these regulations now, whether ONGC has implemented, and I'm sure they must be having some sort of mechanism to when they do the vetting of the subcontractors. But like Anand was mentioning, these things are need to be sort of assessed. And another important thing is, like he was talking about the age of the vessel. So while there's an interesting thing which I saw, that the ONGC has a requirement internally that we do not charter vessels which are more than 21 years of age. So that's a very good thing. It's a great thing. You don't charter, that's fine. But they permit the EPC contractors to charter a vessel which is 42 years old.
Oh my God, 42.
Yes. So now the issue is that I'm quite surprised, that and it goes beyond my understanding that the deliverables by this 42-year-old vessel are going into the ONGC's hands. So the question is that if you are chartering a vessel, and just because you did not charter it and you have let your EPC contractor to charter it, it doesn't mean that the service quality is going to be the same. So there is going to be a deterioration, and you are the recipient of this service delivery. So the regulations should be precisely the same as what you have for yourself, and the same should apply to the EPC contractors.
That's a very interesting point. यहाँ देखिए साहब, जब आप गाड़ी चलाते हैं, कहते हैं कि साहब 15 साल के बाद आप गाड़ी नहीं चला सकते हैं. So to say that you can allow a contractor or some other, sub agency in the whole chain to operate a vessel that is more than 40 years, I'm sure this needs some relook. But let me turn to you, Captain Sudhir. ONGC, will leave it aside for the time being. With your international experience, what about the other big oil giants? There are so many big players in the oil market, Chevron, Mobil, Exxon, etc., and the UK companies. What is the kind of responsibility that devolves upon them? And given their long decades of experience, they are also stakeholders to convey to the people working with them that your safety is of paramount importance. We will not compromise. So can you share with us the kind of practices and protocols that are in place when we talk about the big global giants? Captain Sudhir?
Yeah, I can tell you about the big companies. What happens is they have more than maybe thousands of rigs performing, doing this drilling job all over the world. And for them, reputation is more important, because if shutting down one field in one part of the world is very small, but the brand name is very important for them. So they have no problem shutting down the field 5 days in advance, or 6 days, or 7 days in advance. But smaller companies, which is operating only one field or two fields, shutting down one field means 100% loss of financial losses. I mean, for 7 days or 10 days or whatever period, it's a lot of big money we are talking about. Just like what they have done, ONGC, after this, what happened in West Coast, they have evacuated all in Kaveri Basin. Almost every rig and platform has been evacuated 7 days in advance, whereas the storm was going to pass close to Orissa, not even close to the location.
So it's a classic overreaction.
Overreaction. Okay. And that means they have a procedure. They had a procedure where you'd have evacuated persons, But this side on the West Coast, nobody did it. And on East Coast, they have done it much before, 7 days in advance, which is too early to evacuate. They can, they can evacuate minimum number 50% people, then bring down to 20%, bring down to 10% minimum, and then wait for the last minute, to evacuate all if it is, getting into center of the storm, So for a bigger companies, their policies are very strict, very clear, and they don't mind, implementing, allow us everybody to authorize every field OIM or field superintendent to take a decision locally without any repercussion. So
But
there, you are very free to take a decision. You can shut down your field anytime you want. The moment even a small worker is allowed to say stop. We have a stop work authority. Even ordinary worker can stop the work and ask him, no, I think he's not right. And even if he's wrong, I have to convince him if it is right or it is wrong. I have to tell him why it is right, and if it is wrong, why it is wrong.
That's an interesting concept.
No,
Stop
this is
work
a stop work authority is given to every employee who is employed offshore.
Thank you. Thank you. That's
But
a good
only
point.
thing is the regulatory compliance, which Captain Singhal is saying, the maritime compliance is very different from offshore requirement, because offshore is they have big money, they are localized,
Yeah.
and
And it's a highly specialized kind of domain of activity. As
Correct.
opposed
Yes.
to the
So
others. But I'll come back on that. Anand, can I request you in wrapping up to offer some thoughts about, the way ahead? What are the kind of policy issues that need to be flagged? Anand?
Yes, sir. So there's a very important point which Captain Singhal has made, and that is that ONGC has got a rule for herself that when they charter a vessel up to 21 years. But the subcontractor can hire ancient vessels. Now, to give you an example, the tug Varaprada, which sank, now she was 34 years old. She did not have her pumps, which are used to pump out water from the engine room, working.
Oh my God.
So the flooding of the engine room just was uncontrollable. And so if in a vessel which is so old, so their generators, pumps, everything is questionable. And definitely, I agree with Captain Singhal that whatever rule is there for the ONGC chartered vessels, the same rule should be applied to the subcontractors. That is the number one requirement. So if you have a vessel not more than, say, 20 years old, you'll be in a fairly good condition.
So I think ensuring compliance is something that seems to be central to many of these points that we are making.
Yes.
But can I turn to Captain Singhal? Captain Singhal, if you could also share your thoughts about the policy issues. What do you think are areas that the policymaker should be looking at?
Yes, sir. So the first thing is that, it is only an investigation, which the results of an investigation, which will tell us where exactly the faults were. And the investigation should be conducted, through a judicial sort of process. And the persons involved in the investigation should actually have no linkage with any of the interested parties, with the subcontractors, ONGC, or the Director General of Shipping. It should be done by independent personnel. Now, they need to review whether their practices are in line with the international practices, such as ones defined by the OCIMF, that's the Oil Companies International Forum, and they can adopt that in case there is something missing. They also should do another thing, is display the HSE parameters of their subcontractors on the website, and so that, and even in the bidding process, the ONGC should take into consideration what is the subcontractor's HSE rating. So that is something, when it gets displayed on the public website, even the contractors would, endeavor to improve their, sort of standards. And there is a section under the Merchant Shipping Act, which Section 361, which empowers the judicial magistrate, to conduct an investigation into such a incident.
I think that's a very good point. Both transparency and the investigation. Captain Sudhir, your closing thoughts about policy issues in the way ahead.
I think what has happened, but now what Captain Singhal has said, we should have a independent investigation, and maybe that can be, from this mistake, this lessons learned, they have to implement whatever the drawbacks or gaps are, and ensure that it doesn't happen in future, because this is how they should go about doing things, because what has happened has happened,
And make sure it doesn't happen again. I think that's a very important point. The
the tragedy
of Papa 305 and the loss of precious lives, as you're saying, Captain Sudhir, should serve as a not to be ignored trigger pulse, if I could put it that way, for rigorous institutional review of safety at sea. अर्थात ये कि एक प्रकार का सांस्थानिक समीक्षा होना चाहिए ताकि आगे इस प्रकार का जो हादसा है वो कभी दोबारा ना हो. या नवीन बोलिए.
No, I was just talking about, the Deepwater Horizon oil tragedy in 2010 that was chartered by BP. And, the operators were Transocean and Halliburton, but BP was only a charterer like ONGC. Today, BP has a court claim, which is about 65 billion US dollars, whereas the claim on Halliburton and Transocean is very minimal. So the issue here is that the ONGC should take cue from this as the main charterers, as such, and BP. And it's a very similar incident where lives were lost. The fire took 3 days to extinguish, and the oil spill from Deepwater Horizon took about 3 months to be shut. So this is just what I wanted to add, sir.
But I think we had some very good points made. Therefore, I would make this, advocacy and a plea that setting up an independent inquiry panel would be desirable. One that has experts from outside of the current stakeholders and ministries, and they should have the mandate to investigate the P305 tragedy, as also do a scan of the existing framework in India for regulating offshore drilling activities and suggest policy correctives, because this is a very specialized area and also some large fiscal revenues are involved. But there is no denying the fact that India is a maritime nation. Look at the peninsula of India. And astutely managed, the maritime domain with the EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, can contribute significantly to India's comprehensive growth story. We need a blue revolution in this country after the green and the white. But for this potential to be realized, a radical overhaul of the existing silos and the insular lattices that have grown, they need to be revived. And this is all the more important if Prime Minister Modi's vision of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, is to be meaningfully realized. One hopes that the panel or the inquiry would be constituted and we would have some understanding about what exactly has happened as far as the P305 tragedy is concerned. On that note, allow me to thank my guests, Captain Sudhir Kumar, Captain Naveen Singhal, and Commander Anand Kulkarni. Thank you for watching Security Analysis. We will be back soon.